Is heaven for real? And no matter how much you believe, we all sort of want proof.
And what this boy says happened to him fascinates me, and I'm not alone. I mean, the book sold more than 10 million copies.
Jesus came to me and told me that I have to go back to earth and be a good Christian and tell others about him.
He looked over to me and says, "Oh, Mom, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I saw your other two kids." And I just looked at him because I wasn't sure what he was talking about.
Landon Whitley's story is unlike anything you've ever heard. After a terrible car accident, he died and came back with memories of what he saw beyond life. At just 8 years old, he experienced something that would leave a lasting mark on his life and those around him. He returned with a message, a vision of what lies beyond death, one that would challenge the way we think about life and the mysteries that follow. What did Landon see during those moments when he was no longer alive? Join us as we go through Landon's story and how he returned from death with a terrifying message from Jesus. The day that changed everything. It was a sunny Sunday morning, October 19th, 1997. The kind of morning where everything feels peaceful, where the world seems to move at a slower, gentler pace. For Julie and Andy Whitley, it was no different. After attending church with their son Landon, they were driving home, reflecting on the sermon they had just heard. Landon, just 8 years old, sat in the back seat, buckled up as always, his thoughts likely drifting in the way only a child's can. The family's modest Pontiac Sunfire cruised through the familiar streets, the world outside a blur of golden autumn leaves. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing hinted at the horror that was about to unfold. Julie glanced over at Andy, who was smiling as he drove, unaware that in a few short moments, their lives would be irrevocably changed. As they approached the intersection of Highway 109, their car slowly edged closer to the traffic light. At that exact moment, an ambulance was barreling down the road at high speed, responding to an emergency call. Its sirens blared, lights flashing as it neared the red light. What happened next would be a blur in Julie's memory forever. A violent collision that sounded like a bomb had gone off, metal crunching, glass shattering. The ambulance had run the red light, smashing directly into the Whitley's car. The force of the crash was devastating. The impact threw the car several feet down the road, crumpling it like a tin can. Andy, who had been driving, was killed instantly. His life snuffed out in the blink of an eye. Julie, unconscious and bleeding, was trapped in the passenger seat. And in the back, young Landon lay motionless, his small body crushed beneath the wreckage. When the first responders arrived, it was a scene of chaos. Flames flickered from the crumpled vehicle. The ambulance crew, visibly shaken, rushed to assist. As they pried open the twisted metal, they pulled Julie from the car first. She was alive, but barely. Next, they found Landon, unresponsive. No pulse, no breath. To the medics, it looked like the boy hadn't survived either, but they didn't give up. For over an hour, they fought to bring Landon back. His lifeless body was rushed to Carolina's medical center. The paramedics did everything they could, performing CPR, using a defibrillator, anything that could keep hope alive. And miraculously, after what seemed like an eternity, they found a pulse. But Landon's journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. In the chaos of that tragic day, Landon would be revived not once, but 3 times. Each time his heart stopped, doctors feared they had lost him. Each time he returned to life, though something profound had happened during those moments he was gone. Moments that, to this day, Landon believes were spent in a place beyond this world. While the doctors fought to keep his body alive, Landon was experiencing something far greater. Something that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who heard his story. So what did Landon actually see? The moment Landon saw Jesus. For most of us, death is a finality, a great unknown that sits on the other side of life. But for Landon, death became a door. Each time his heart stopped on that fateful day, he wasn't just unconscious or lost in the void. He was somewhere else, somewhere beyond the confines of the physical world. The first time he died, Landon remembers feeling as though he was floating. There was no pain, no fear, He described it later as peaceful, almost serene, as if a great weight had been lifted from his small body. When he opened his eyes, he realized he was no longer in the car. He was no longer on Earth at all. Instead, Landon found himself standing in a place that words couldn't quite capture. The air around him shimmered, glowing with a light that wasn't harsh or blinding, but soft and warm, like the first rays of dawn. Everything was golden, ethereal. He looked down at his feet and saw that he wasn't standing on solid ground, at least not in the way we understand it. Beneath him was a path made of pure gold, as if the very streets of this place were paved with the precious metal. The road stretched out endlessly in front of him, leading toward a glowing figure in the distance. And then, Landon saw him. Standing at the end of the path was a figure he instinctively recognized. Even though Landon had never seen him before, he knew exactly who this was. It was Jesus.
I'm not doing it for someone who I don't know or I've never seen. I've seen Jesus. I know he's there. He's asked me to doing this, and this is what I'm doing.
But this wasn't the Jesus he'd seen in Sunday school pictures or imagined while reading Bible stories. No, this Jesus was unlike anything his young mind had ever conceived. He was radiating a brilliance, a light so pure and strong that it filled Landon with an overwhelming sense of peace, love, and safety. As Landon approached, he saw other figures standing alongside Jesus. At first, they were just distant forms, but as he got closer, he realized they were familiar. His father was there, smiling at him warmly. He looked just as he had before the accident, alive, whole, and healthy. Beside him were other relatives that Landon had never met in life, but he somehow recognized instinctively. Two figures stood close to his father, figures he would later identify as his siblings, children his mother had lost through miscarriages before he was born.
Like my mom had said, at 8 years old, I had no idea that she had 2 miscarriages. And just like she had said, knowing that my dad's there with them now.
But it was the sight of Jesus that left the most profound impact. Jesus didn't speak to him at first. He just smiled. A gentle, all-knowing smile that seemed to penetrate Landon's very soul. There was no need for words, no need for explanations. In that moment, everything made sense. Everything was clear. Landon felt like he belonged here, like he had come home. And yet he also sensed that this wasn't his time to stay. Jesus approached him, his arms open wide. As Landon stepped into the embrace of his Savior, he felt a warmth unlike anything he had ever known. It was as if every fear, every worry, every doubt melted away in the presence of that love. Time didn't exist here. There was no sense of past or future, only the eternal now, and in that moment, Landon felt truly whole. But then, as suddenly as he had arrived, everything began to fade. The golden streets, the figures, even Jesus himself, all slowly started to blur into light. Landon didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay in this place forever, but he knew, deep down, that he couldn't. Before everything disappeared, Jesus spoke to him. His voice was calm, gentle, yet filled with authority. Jesus told Landon that it wasn't his tenure yet, and he had to go back. He talked about how Landon had purpose and should be a good Christian and tell others about him. And just like that, Landon was pulled back into the physical world, back into his broken body lying in the hospital, back into the pain and confusion of life. The doctors had managed to revive him once again, and though his body was battered, his soul had been touched by something far greater than any medical intervention. Landon's journey back to life. When Landon was pulled back from the brink of death, the serene peace of heaven evaporated, replaced by the harsh reality of his broken body. His return was anything but miraculous in the eyes of the medical team. Instead, it was a fight for survival. His small form lay bandaged, encased in so many medical equipment that beeped and whirred, the sounds of which filled the sterile hospital room. The medical team did all they could, but the prognosis was grim. The trauma Landon had experienced was extensive. His body had been torn apart by the car crash, and his brain had suffered the greatest blow. His mother, Julie, remained by his side, praying with unwavering faith. She had already lost her husband in the accident, and the idea of losing her son as well felt unbearable. The doctors had warned her that even if Landon survived, there was a high chance his brain would be permanently damaged. They prepared her for the worst, a life where her son might never speak, walk, or live independently again. Yet deep within her, Julie refused to accept this fate. Her faith in God and the miracle that had brought Landon back to life kept her going. Weeks passed, and Landon remained unconscious, clinging to life with each passing day. His body was fighting, though the odds were heavily stacked against him. But then something extraordinary began to happen. Landon's condition, rather than deteriorating, slowly started to improve. Brain scans that were expected to reveal irreparable damage returned with results that puzzled the doctors. The once bleak future they had forecasted now seemed less certain. There was still hope. 2 weeks after the crash, Landon opened his eyes. The moment he woke was a miracle in itself. For Julie, it was the answer to her prayers, a sign that her faith had been rewarded. Landon was alive and, though weak, conscious. However, the road ahead was still uncertain. The trauma of the accident had left lasting physical scars. His face was disfigured, and he had lost vision in one eye. Extensive surgeries would be needed to reconstruct his skull, and the physical therapy that awaited him would be arduous. But he was alive, and that was more than enough for his mother. Landon's recovery was slow, but one thing was clear from the start. His near-death experience had profoundly changed him. His memories of heaven, vivid and detailed, stayed with him even as he began to heal. When he first shared his experience with Julie, it became evident that her son had returned not just as the same boy, but as someone who had witnessed something far beyond this world. One of the first conversations they had when he regained his strength revolved around the death of his father. Julie had been dreading the moment when she would have to tell Landon the painful truth, that his father had died in the crash. But when she broached the subject, she was unprepared for Landon's response. He already knew. Landon calmly told her that he had seen his father in heaven. The revelation left Julie in shock. Landon had been unconscious during the funeral and had not been told of his father's passing. Yet he described the encounter in heaven with a sense of peace, recounting how his father had looked at ease, bathed in the light of heaven, surrounded by love. It was a sight that comforted him, and through him, it comforted Julie as well. But Landon's revelations didn't stop there. He spoke of meeting 2 other figures in heaven, his siblings. This surprised Julie even more because she had never told Landon about the miscarriages she had suffered before his birth. Yet, her son described the souls of his unborn siblings as though he had known them all his life, as if in heaven there was a recognition, a connection that transcended earthly boundaries. It was another inexplicable part of his journey, one that strengthened Julie's belief that her son had truly experienced something otherworldly. As Landon continued his recovery, he spoke more about his experience. He recalled seeing angels who watched over him with kindness and love, and the overwhelming sense of peace that filled heaven. But most significant was the message he received. According to Landon, he had been given a purpose. He was to return to life to fulfill a mission. It wasn't his time to stay in heaven just yet. He was to live, to be a proof to the reality of heaven, and to spread a message of love and faith. This newfound purpose gave Landon the strength to face the long road of rehabilitation that awaited him. The physical toll of the accident had been immense. Landon would undergo multiple surgeries, including one to reconstruct his nose using a portion of his skull. His vision in his left eye was gone forever, and his head was now held together with 23 metal plates. For Julie, her son's survival and the stories he shared from the other side were nothing short of miraculous. She still mourned the loss of her husband, but knowing that he was at peace in heaven brought her some comfort. Landon's recovery, slow and painful as it was, reinforced her belief that there was a divine plan at work. The doctors had said that Landon's survival was against all odds, but Julie knew that it was more than just luck. Her son had a purpose to fulfill. As Landon regained his strength, the memories of heaven stayed with him, shaping the way he viewed the world. He no longer feared death. He had seen what awaited him and understood that death was not an end, but a continuation of life filled with love and peace. Landon, adjusting to a new normal. After regaining consciousness, Landon faced a reality that was vastly different from the one he had known before the accident. While he had returned from his near-death experience with inner peace and a clear sense of purpose, the physical world around him presented a series of daunting challenges. His body, still fragile and scarred from the trauma, required months of rehabilitation and medical care. The surgeries had saved his life, but they had also left him with scars that would forever remind him of that fateful day. Landon's mother, Julie, remained by his side through every step of his recovery. Her faith had been rewarded in her son's survival, but the day-to-day reality of caring for him weighed heavily on her. The accident had claimed the life of her husband, and though Landon had survived, she had to now live life without her partner. She carried this grief silently, focusing all her energy on supporting Landon as he embarked on the long road to recovery. For Landon, the world had changed. His once active body was now in a state of recovery, weakened from the multiple surgeries and the injuries sustained during the accident. He had lost his vision in one eye, and the surgeries on his skull and face had left him with a different appearance, one that he wasn't used to seeing in the mirror. Adjusting to his physical limitations was a difficult task for the young boy. His body, once strong and full of energy, now felt foreign, and the process of healing required patience he had never needed before. Physical therapy sessions were exhausting. Each day presented new challenges as Landon worked to rebuild his strength. Basic tasks, such as walking or lifting objects, became difficult. He had to learn how to move again, how to see the world with his altered vision, and how to cope with the physical pain that often accompanied his therapy sessions. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Landon's recovery became one of healing not just for his body, but for his spirit and mind as well. Each therapy session felt like a battle, yet Landon approached them with the determination and bravery that has affected his life since the accident. He was driven by the memories of his near-death experience and the comforting knowledge of the love that awaited him beyond this world. In the beginning, Landon struggled with feelings of frustration and sadness. He often felt isolated from his friends and peers, unable to participate in the activities he once enjoyed. The difference between his pre-accident life and his current reality weighed heavily on him. He missed playing soccer, riding his bike, and running freely in the sun. The simple pleasures of childhood now seemed like distant memories, overshadowed by the gravity of his situation. Even at that, Landon found solace in his faith. His experiences in heaven had opened his heart to a deeper understanding of love and connection, and he began to take pride in this newfound spirituality in more amazing ways. He became more involved in his church community, attending youth groups and Bible studies. It was here that he found a sense of belonging, surrounded by others who shared similar values and beliefs. Their support helped reinforce his conviction that life, no matter how difficult, was filled with purpose and hope. Julie, too, found strength in their shared faith. The church provided her with a network of friends who understood her grief and offered comfort in the form of shared prayers and meals. As Landon healed, she focused on nurturing his spiritual growth, encouraging him to engage his thoughts and feelings about the afterlife. She often reminded him that his journey was not just about physical healing, it was about finding peace within himself and understanding the significance of his experience. Over time, Landon's physical condition improved. With each passing day, he gained more strength and coordination. He could walk unassisted and even managed to join a modified version of a support group for kids recovering from injuries. One of the friends he met at the support group was a girl named Mia, who had suffered a severe injury in a car accident. Like Landon, Mia had experienced significant physical therapy, but her spirit remained unbroken. They quickly bonded over shared experiences and the challenges they faced. Mia often told Landon how she had turned to art as a way to cope with her pain, using her creativity to express the emotions she struggled to put into words. Inspired by her resilience, Landon began to explore art as a form of therapy, allowing him to express his feelings and experiences through drawing. Art became a powerful outlet for Landon, offering him a way to process the trauma he had endured. He filled sketchbooks with drawings of his memories from heaven, visions of warmth, light, and the ethereal beings he had encountered. Each stroke of the pencil seemed to connect him to that otherworldly realm, reminding him of the peace he had felt during his experience. As his art flourished, so did his sense of purpose. Landon began to organize art sessions at the hospital, inviting other children to join him in creating and sharing their own artwork. He wanted to create a safe space where they could share their stories and support one another through their healing journeys. With Julie's support, Landon also decided to hold an art exhibition showcasing the artwork created by himself and his young friends. The exhibition would serve as a platform for their stories and a way to inspire others who had faced similar challenges. As the date of the exhibition approached, excitement buzzed in the air. Landon's friends rallied around him, offering their help in organizing the event. They collaborated on marketing materials, decorations, and even refreshments. Landon was amazed by the support he received from his friends and family, and he felt more empowered than ever to share his story. On the day of the exhibition, the atmosphere was electric. When it was time for Landon to speak, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He had practiced his speech countless times, but standing in front of a crowd made his heart race. With Julie by his side, he took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. As he began to speak, his voice trembled but grew steadier with each word. Landon shared his journey, the accident, his near-death experience, and the power of art to heal. He spoke about the love he felt in heaven and how that love had inspired him to help others find their own healing through creativity. The crowd listened intently, their eyes filled with empathy and admiration. As Landon concluded his speech, the room erupted in applause. He felt a rush of joy and accomplishment. Through his vulnerability, he had touched hearts, inspiring people to reflect on their own lives and the importance of resilience. The exhibition was a resounding success. Landon received messages of gratitude from parents whose children had been inspired by his story. They thanked him for showing them that healing is possible and that there is beauty in vulnerability. As the exhibition came to a close, Landon felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He realized that his journey of healing had only just begun. The experiences he had gone through and the community he had built around him were part of a greater purpose, a purpose that extended beyond his own life. He understood that he was meant to share his story, to help others find hope in their own struggles, and to remind them that they were not alone. Landon's story is one that is touching and thought-provoking. But could his message be a sign that there's more to life and death than we can understand? The gospel writer interprets Caiaphas' statement as a prophetic declaration that Jesus' death would really save us, but in a way that went far beyond what Caiaphas intended. From a Christian theological perspective, Jesus' death was not merely a tragic consequence of political pragmatism, but a redemptive act meant to atone for the sins of humanity. Caiaphas, in his attempt to control the situation, unknowingly affirmed this destiny, adding a layer of tragic irony to his words. By stating that it was better for one man to die, Caiaphas inadvertently pointed to Jesus' role as the Lamb of God, a sacrificial figure whose death would fulfill divine purpose. To early Christians, this was a shocking realization, that even those who opposed Jesus, like Caiaphas, had a part in God's plan. It is this double-sided interpretation of Caiaphas' prophecy that is terrifying. On one level, his words show the lengths to which religious leaders would go to protect their power, even if it meant condemning an innocent man. On another, they demonstrate how human actions, even those rooted in self-interest, could align with a divine script beyond their control. Caiaphas' role in Jesus' arrest and trial. To secure agreement on arresting Jesus, Caiaphas played on the fears of the Sanhedrin members. He presented Jesus' teachings as a disruptive force that could, in the end, endanger their way of life. Since he understood that not all members of the Sanhedrin would view Jesus as a direct threat, he knew that by framing Jesus' arrest as a measure of public safety, he could appeal to the council members' concerns about stability. Through persuasion and political wit, he was able to bring the Sanhedrin to a point where they collectively agreed to move against Jesus, seeing it as a necessary step to protect their community. According to the Gospels, Caiaphas convened a trial where he and other leaders questioned Jesus about his teachings and intentions. During this trial, Caiaphas sought evidence that would justify a death sentence under Jewish law, a charge he could then present to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, for official approval. The trial was a complex affair, with Caiaphas using his authority to steer it toward a predetermined outcome. He knew that he needed Roman approval to carry out a death sentence, but by orchestrating the trial, he ensured that Jesus would be delivered to Pilate with charges that implied civil disorder, and it was a charge serious enough for the Romans to take action. But it did not end there. The prophetic significance of Caiaphas's statement is also tied to later events in history, particularly the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD.
Starting in April of 70 AD and lasting nearly 5 months, the battle would be a brutal, no-holds-barred brawl fought over every inch of the city. At stake was the success of the Great Revolt in Judea and the survival of the Jewish people.
According to many theologians, this event holds a tragic irony, symbolizing a consequence of the rejection of Jesus. In the Gospels, Jesus predicted that the temple would be destroyed, and his words are often understood as a foreshadowing of the Roman siege. Theologians see this as more than a historical event. They interpret it as a spiritual symbol of judgment. The loss of the temple, which had been the main part of Jewish worship, became a powerful image of the consequences of rejecting Jesus. This interpretation draws a line from Caiaphas's prophecy to the later destruction of Jerusalem, suggesting that the two events are closely related in a Christian judgment and redemption. It is basically terrifying to look at these things in retrospect and consider how these things played out, especially when the Christians remember that the Bible says that all things work together for good, and God is able to use every matter for his glory. It is a reminder to seek what the Lord has in his heart, instead of only judging by physical circumstances, because ultimately, even the bad things, he is able to turn for good. But those who knew him closely noticed a change. There were whispers of his growing unease, of sleepless nights haunted by something he couldn't escape. But what troubled this once confident leader? Was it guilt, fear, or something else entirely? For a moment, imagine being one of the most powerful and respected men in your community. You hold a position of great authority. Your decisions can influence the lives of thousands. You are seen as a leader, a guide, a man who is trusted to uphold the law and keep the peace.
Jesus gives us hope in eternal life with him. He also gives us hope of a new heaven and new earth with no pain, no sadness, and no tears.
But what happens when the weight of your choices begins to haunt you? What happens when the secrets you've kept and the decisions you've made start to unravel in your mind, especially as you near the end of your life? This is exactly what began to happen to Caiaphas. These events leading to his final days on earth have made people ask questions like, what did all this power and responsibility do to him? It's easy to see Caiaphas as a cold, calculating figure only interested in preserving his power. But what if, behind that strong exterior, there were hidden fears and deep regrets that gnawed at him, especially in his final moments? Did he ever feel the weight of his decisions, especially those that involved the trial and crucifixion of Jesus? You may not know, but Jesus' trial and crucifixion had far-reaching consequences, not just for the future of Christianity, but also for Caiaphas himself. While Caiaphas likely believed that he had neutralized a threat, he had also set into motion events that would lead to his own downfall. Jesus' death did not end the movement he had started. It only grew stronger. The followers of Jesus, known as Christians, continued to spread his teachings. Within a few years, the movement had gained significant traction. Caiaphas may have underestimated the impact of Jesus' followers, but the Romans did not. As the Christian movement grew, it became clear that Caiaphas' decision to execute Jesus had not brought the peace and stability he had hoped for. Instead, it had sown the seeds of a powerful new force that the Roman authorities would eventually have to contend with. However, Jesus' situation wasn't the only factor in Caiaphas' downfall. His long tenure as high priest had made him many enemies among the Jewish people and the Roman administration. While Caiaphas was skilled at navigating Roman politics, he could only do so for a while. Over time, the power he thought he wielded began to tip against him. One of the key moments in Caiaphas's fall came in 36 CE when Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who had overseen Jesus' trial, was recalled to Rome. Pilate had been an ally of Caiaphas, and his removal from power left Caiaphas vulnerable. Without Pilate's support, Caiaphas's position became increasingly endangered. Around the same time, political tensions in the region were escalating. The Roman authorities were becoming increasingly concerned about unrest in Judea.
All of Judea was under Roman rule. Herod's succession plans were required to be approved by Caesar Augustus, which Herod had failed to do before his death.
And they began to see Caiaphas not as a stabilizing force, but as part of the problem. They may have viewed his handling of Jesus' situation as an example of poor judgment, which led to more trouble rather than less. But that's not all. The final blow came in 36 CE when Caiaphas was removed from his position as high priest. The Roman governor of Syria, Lucius Vitellius, who had been given authority over the region, decided that it was time for a change. Vitellius deposed Caiaphas, ending his nearly 2-decade-long reign. Caiaphas was replaced by Jonathan ben Ananus, the son of his father-in-law Annas. This marked the end of Caiaphas's influence and power. After his removal, Caiaphas faded into obscurity. He is said to have retired quietly, living out his remaining years away from the public eye until the moments leading to his final breath. But his legacy was already sealed. For centuries to come, Caiaphas would be remembered not as a wise and powerful leader, but as the man who played a pivotal role in the death of Jesus. For a man like Caiaphas, losing his position as high priest would have been devastating. His entire identity was tied to his role as the leader of the Jewish people. Without that position, he was just another man, stripped of the authority and respect he had once commanded. As you've seen, Caiaphas, like every other human, had his fair share of life's struggles. After all, he was human, and no matter how powerful or confident he appeared, moments of doubt and fear began to set in, especially after losing his position and influence. One of the biggest fears Caiaphas might have faced was the fear of judgment, not just from God, but from history. He knew he would be remembered as the man who condemned Jesus, the figure central to what would become the largest religion in the world. But did Caiaphas fear that his legacy would be one of betrayal and injustice? Did he worry about how future generations would view him? There is no doubt that Caiaphas might also have feared the consequences of his actions on a spiritual level. As a high priest, he was deeply knowledgeable about the scriptures and the teachings of his faith. He knew the prophecies about the Messiah, even though he refused to believe that Jesus was the one. Do you think he ever wondered if he had made a terrible mistake? Undoubtedly, the possibility of having rejected the true Messiah must have weighed heavily on him, especially as he neared death and faced the prospect of meeting his Creator. However, as Caiaphas approached the end of his life, he finally revealed the source of his torment. Now, this is the moment you've been waiting for. His final words. On his deathbed, surrounded by those closest to him, Caiaphas uttered words that would shock and terrify those who heard them. He spoke of a vision he had seen that had come to him repeatedly since the night of Jesus' trial. In this vision, Caiaphas saw Jesus not as the condemned man he had sent to the cross, but as a figure of immense power and glory, standing in judgment over him. Caiaphas described the vision in vivid detail. He said Jesus was dressed in radiant light, with eyes piercing his soul. In the vision, Jesus didn't speak a word. Still, his presence alone was enough to fill Caiaphas with a sense of dread and regret so overwhelming that it consumed him. Caiaphas confessed that this vision had plagued him for years, growing stronger and more vivid as his death approached. He admitted that he had realized too late that Jesus was indeed who he claimed to be, the Messiah, the Son of God.
Jesus is God's Son in the sense that he is God made manifest in human form. Jesus is God's Son in that he was conceived in Mary by the Holy Spirit.
But it was more than just realizing his mistake that terrified Caiaphas. It was the knowledge that he had played a direct role in the death of an innocent man, a man who had the power to forgive sins, to heal, and to bring hope to the world. This realization was so overwhelming that it shook Caiaphas to his core. Caiaphas revealed a deep fear many of us can relate to in those final moments. The fear of facing the consequences of our actions and being judged for our mistakes. For Caiaphas, this fear was magnified by the weight of his decisions so many years ago, which had changed the course of history. He feared not just for his earthly life, but for his soul, knowing that he would soon face the one he had condemned. As he took his last breath, Caiaphas's final words echoed through the room. "I was wrong. He is the Son of God." These words, spoken by a man who had once stood so firmly against Jesus, reveal a powerful truth. No matter how powerful or confident we may seem, there are moments when we must confront the reality of our actions and the truth that we have tried to deny. Caiaphas's last words were more than just a confession. They were a warning to all who heard them. This is a warning that the decisions we make in this life have lasting consequences, and that the truth, no matter how much we try to hide from it, will always come to light. These words were so terrifying because they came from a man who had once been so sure of himself, so certain of his actions, only to realize in the end that he had been wrong all along. But why were these words hidden until now? Why would someone go to great lengths to hide a man's last words? These questions have risen around the final moments of Caiaphas, because these last words are said to have contained something so terrifying that they were hidden for centuries. But what was so dangerous about it that it needed to be buried in secrecy? One theory is that Caiaphas's last words revealed his doubts about the decision to condemn Jesus. If he admitted to feeling guilt or fear about what he had done, it would have shaken the very foundations of the early Christian and Jewish communities. For Christians, it would mean that the man who sent Jesus to the cross might have realized too late that he had condemned an innocent man. For the Jewish leadership, it could undermine their authority, showing that even the high priest had doubts. But who would want to keep this hidden? What if I tell you that the early Christian church had much to gain by controlling the narrative of Jesus' death? Suppose Caiaphas's last words were to reveal any remorse. In that case, it complicated the story of Jesus' sacrifice and the blame placed on the Jewish authorities.
Christendom has blamed the Jews. They shouldn't have blamed anybody. They should have blamed themselves for sinning in the first place, and Jesus comes to save us from our sins.
On the other hand, the Jewish leaders would have had their own reasons to keep any such admission quiet.
This is the Golden Gate. It's the east gate. It's known as the Mercy Gate to Jerusalem. As you can tell, it's been sealed up for a long, long time because the Muslims also believe that Jesus is a great prophet. They also believe that he's coming back. They also believe that he is going to judge the whole world. And when he returns, they also fear that he's going to come back up onto the Temple Mount.
One of the 8 gates that gives access into the city of Jerusalem, the Golden Gate has recently been declared opened.
The Golden Gate is the only eastern gate to the Temple Mount, and one of only 2 gates from the east into the Old City of Jerusalem. The Golden Gate was sealed shut in 1541. It had been sealed once before that in 810, but was opened by Crusaders in the 1200s.
It was said to have been shut for centuries based on biblical prophecy by prophet Ezekiel, who foretold that the gate would only be opened when a prince returns. Interestingly, this prince is recognized by the Jews and Muslims as the Messiah and by the Christians as Jesus. However, there have been controversies on the reopening of this gate. Could this event be a sign of the fulfillment of the prophecy? And what promise does it hold for humanity? Join us as we explore the mystery behind the opening of this gate and its significance to the human race. The history of the Golden Gate. The Eastern Gate of Jerusalem, one of the city's 8 gates, holds a significant importance for Christians and people of different faiths. This gate is known as the Golden Gate, or Sha'ar Harachamim in Hebrew, which means the Gate of Mercy. This gate has been left shut for centuries, making its closure and spiritual significance a focal point of Christian beliefs and traditions. What led to its seal might be backed with a biblical reference, a prophecy by Ezekiel in Ezekiel 44 verses 1-3 that also foretells its reopening only with the Messiah's return. This momentous event reveals Jesus' second coming. Most Christians and Muslims believe that this was the gate through which Jesus entered Jerusalem. This is regarded as the triumphant entry celebrated as Palm Sunday among the Christians.
Palm Sunday is a Christian holiday that commemorates Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem on a donkey.
Another significant belief of the Christians is that the gate serves as the meeting point of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and her father Joachim. Based on research, the existence of the Golden Gates can be traced as far back as 546 BC, making it one of the oldest gates in Jerusalem. But this gate isn't just one of those old structures. There are more interesting facts about it. The Golden Gate was first built during the reign of Hezekiah, when the population of the city multiplied and it became difficult to protect all its inhabitants. This made King Hezekiah fortify the existing walls of the city and build a new wall to protect those people living outside the main city walls. He built a water tunnel to keep the water from the Gihon spring inside the city walls so that the Assyrians wouldn't cut off the city's water supply. However, it wasn't a long-lasting solution. The Babylonians invaded and occupied Jerusalem in 586 BC. They destroyed the temple, burnt the gates with fire, and pulled down the walls. But this wasn't all. The Jews were then sent off into exile to Babylon.
In 605 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian forces descended upon Jerusalem, laying siege to the holy city. Solomon's temple destroyed, the city burned, and the Judeans faced a harrowing exile into Babylon.
Later on, the Persian king Cyrus conquered the Babylonian Empire and allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. It was during this period that Nehemiah came to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls, gates, and defenses of the city in just 52 days with the help of the people. The Golden Gate was said to have been built 4 times before its final construction. It is also believed that an arch, most possibly of a former gate, lies directly beneath the blocked entranceway of the Golden Gate. Now, due to all of these mysteries, multiple scholars have researched the history of this Eastern Gate, revealing shocking discoveries. The first-century historian, Josephus, mentioned an Eastern Gate in his Antiquities of the Jews and pointed out the fact that the gate was situated within the far northeastern end of the inner sacred court of the temple. The Mishnah, the first major written collection of the Jewish oral traditions known as the Oral Torah, mentioned a former causeway that led out of the Temple Mount eastward over the Kidron Valley, extending as far as the Mount of Olives. Rather, Rabbi Eliezer said otherwise, that it was not a causeway, but rather marble pillars over which cedar boards had been laid, used by the high priest and his entourage. The Shushan Gate, according to Eliezer, was not used by the masses to enter the Temple Mount, but reserved only for the high priest and all those who aided him when taking out the red heifer or the scapegoat on Yom Kippur.
On October 6, 1973, during Yom Kippur, the holiest Jewish holiday, Israel was attacked from Egypt and Syria.
The Golden Gate has different names attached to it based on different occurrences and situations. During the 10th century, Arab historians gave the 2 entrances to the gate 2 names, giving a name to each arch by the gate. The southern gate was called the Gate of Mercy, and the northern gate was called the Gate of Repentance. Interestingly, the name Golden Gate was given by the Christians. The gate remained of great significance to Christians as it became accustomed to pray at the Gate of Repentance before they proceeded to the Gate of Mercy to ask God for mercy. But it doesn't end here. One amusing fact is that the initial date the current gate was built can't be stated because the Muslims did not give access to the archaeological exploration of the history of the gate. However, according to some scholars, the present gate was built circa 520 AD during the Byzantine period, and it was part of Justinian building program in Jerusalem. This gate was to be built on top of the remnants of the earlier gate in the wall, but this wasn't fully accepted because of an alternative theory that says it was built in the later part of the 7th century by Byzantine artisans employed by the Umayyad caliphs. Interestingly, in the 1970s, a Dutch archaeologist, Leon Rittmeyer, explored the gate and concluded that the two solid big gate posts seen on the inside of the gate belong to the ancient Shushan gate mentioned in Mishnah Midot 1 verse 3 as being the only gate in the eastern wall from the First Temple period. He gave a detailed description of the gate which has every feature linking it to an ancient gate. In his findings, each gate post was approximately 1.4 meters wide, 2.3 meters deep, and 6 meters high. However, it was later discovered that these dimensions were consistent with other known examples of First Temple period architecture, which supports the identification of the gate as the Shushan Gate. From his findings, it could be deduced that the wideness of the gate itself would have been sufficient to accommodate the flow of pilgrims and processions entering the Temple Mount. This means that the gate's spaciousness and strategic location would have made it an important entry point for various religious ceremonies and festivals. Philosopher Maimonides also stated an interesting fact about the Golden Gate in his Code of Jewish Law.
Maimonides was a 12th century Spanish Jewish philosopher, physician, and rabbi. He is also known as Musa bin Maimonides in the Islamic world.
That during the time of the Second Temple, anyone entering from the east gate of the Temple Mount would walk on level ground till the end of the rampart and then climb 12 steps to the court of women, with the height and width of each step being half a cubit. The Golden Gate's outer facade wasn't left out. It was said to be composed of two blocked-up gateways adorned with carefully carved relief arches. The decoration of the arches could be seen as identical to the applied arches of the Double Gate, which was in existence during the early Islamic period. A careful look at the gate shows it could have been rebuilt during the Umayyad period, on the foundations of an earlier gate. The spiritual and religious importance of the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate is spiritually significant to not just the Christians, but to the Jews and Islam, each having its different belief as regards the gate. Their beliefs have been deeply rooted in religious traditions and history, making it a foundation of what we believe presently. One interesting thing about this is that there is a clear similarity to what these religions believe in, each of their belief carefully intertwined. The Jews believe in the coming of a Messiah. They believe the Messiah will enter into Jerusalem through the Golden Gate, and that this occurrence will mark the beginning of the Messianic age. But there is more to what they believed. According to the Jewish tradition, it was said that the Shekinah, which signifies the divine presence of God, used to appear through the Eastern Gate a long time ago, and that it will appear again when the Anointed One, the Messiah, comes, according to Ezekiel's prophecy, in Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 1-3, that talks about a new gate replacing the present one. The Jews cherished this belief and portrayed it by praying for mercy at the Eastern Gate. This was one of the reasons that prompted the name Gate of Mercy. Till date, the gate is held in high esteem by the Jews. This was just one of the beliefs among many others. Historically, the Golden Gate was said to be the meeting point where Joachim and Anne,
Saint Anne and Saint Joachim are the parents of the Blessed Mother, the grandparents of Christ. Saint Anne and Saint Joachim are the patrons of those called to the matrimony.
Mary's parents, the mother of Jesus, met after learning about her conception.